Hello, welcome to Cherry Bekaert's Government Contractors podcast, where we discuss current government contracting trends, compliance matters, and best practices to guide federal contractors forward. My name is Mike Cippel. I'm a managing director at Cherry Bekaert's Outsourced Accounting Advisory practice. And with me today is Irwin Kaplan, a director in our outsourced group. And today we're talking about year-end considerations for government contractors dash planning for the next year. So around this time of year, people start talking about, okay, what do I need to do to close out the year? What are the considerations that we really have to worry about? And a lot of times people start looking at their calendars around Thanksgiving, and really, if you're starting to do your year-end planning around Thanksgiving, you're probably a little bit late. You should be doing that a little bit earlier, kind of as the third quarter is winding down. That's when you're normally looking at year-end planning for final tax, looking at actual rates versus provisional and how that's coming in, and what you can do to change that. A lot of people have audits where they do a little bit of the audit in the fourth quarter and then the rest of it at the beginning of the first quarter. Also looking at what do you need to clean up on balance sheet items so that you're not pulling over old data that, as the older it gets, the worse it gets to try and figure it out, collect it, or write it off to figure out what's going on. And really, you're getting ready for close and tax items such as 1099. So unless you're really starting the consideration for the year end just after you've passed the third quarter, you're going to miss a lot of levers that you could pull in the fourth quarter to help you on final taxes, final net income, and getting the books in order for the new year. So really, by the time most of you are hearing this, which is probably going to be in November, you're really at the end of the year. In reality, we're getting kind of into the next year planning. Is that right, Irwin?
That's exactly right. As you mentioned, all those considerations that you brought up, you should have been working on probably in September, maybe October. You should have been talking to your tax accountant about any goals you had for tax preparation. As you said, if you're getting audited, you're already an interim. And if you're in government contracting with cost type contracts, or you're really sensitive to your indirect rate structure, you're kind of past the point where you could have a large impact on your rates. Maybe if you're low, you could do a large bonus. You could work in a bonus at the end of the year, but you've kind of hit the end of what you can do as far as saving. Like if you were doing staff reductions or anything like that, you're way beyond where you could be if you had to get your rates lower. So I think the reason why we brought that up is because in doing this, we wanted to really start talking about next year planning. Mike and I both we're both here at Cherry Bekaert, but we spent time at larger companies as well, and smaller companies. One of the things that I've noticed with some smaller companies is they kind of skip the budgeting process. They don't. They kind of just, once your company's running, you're just trying to keep the wheels on, and so you kind of skip this process of doing a real year-end look at next year budget. So we wanted to kind of talk about a couple of ways to approach that.
And well, let's go into that. Irwin, take us through kind of your thoughts on budgets.
Yeah. So again, with a larger company, we were always doing what you would call like a top-down budget, and meaning we would be given a goal, and or we would kind of go through our active contracts, and really we would look at those contracts, what we could do as far as revenue and profit on those contracts at the end of the year. It gave us a good idea of what we had in hand already, what contracts had funding, what contracts were in an option year, and also what contracts were ending. And it's always a good idea to have an idea of what's going away mid-year, or what you're going to have to spend some money on a proposal if you're in a recompete. But what I like to do, we always did the top down, but what I always did on the back end is do a bottoms up. And the reason why I did that, the bottoms up would be to kind of take all my people that I had, direct, indirect, and schedule them out as far as what we expected them to be working on and where we had shortfalls as far as like we didn't have people, we didn't have full-time equivalents. Or if we knew that work was going to go away, how many potential people we're going to lose mid-year. And it really gave a reality check to that top down, because a top down could be very pie in the sky. You could say, hey, I'm going to have this, let's say a T&M contract that's going to start in February, and it's going to make 8% profit. But reality, when you do the bottoms up, is that T&M contract, you're going to need to hire, let's say, 5 new FTEs, full-time equivalents. And maybe you're not going to have 5 in February. You're maybe have 2 in February and maybe another 2 in March, So when you kind of do that reality check with the bottoms up, it kind of put in perspective that how much more work you had to do if you wanted to hit that goal that you had in the top down. The bottoms up also kind of gives you a good feel. You kind of build your indirect rates. In fact, this is kind of the time of year where you have your indirect rates solved for in this case 2024 for the current year. But you might want to really have an idea with any new work coming on or any work going away. What are my rates going to look like for 2025? And maybe you're trying to maintain the rates that you have now, or maybe you're trying to get lower to be more competitive in certain cases. So that's where a bottoms up will kind of show you, do I have too many people in indirect? Do I need to really build my base? And where's that base coming from?
And Irwin, doesn't it also, so it's kind of helps you put your indirect rates together based on what you know, obviously. And always there can be new business or the business that goes away. But doesn't it also kind of help you figure out kind of what you can afford going into the next year and how that's going to impact things?
Absolutely. That should be the main driver, is what can I afford to kind of maintain the profitability that we expect to make from the business?
Because with indirect rate, it's great to budget out and figure out what your indirect rates are going to be. We're going to hire this, we're going to do that, but we all know that the plan doesn't always go the way actuals do, and so there's always going to be pressure on margins. There's always going to be on time and material and fixed price, and there's always going to be the chance that you could blow through some cost plus money, particularly if your indirect rates are fluctuating from maybe what you originally bid or what you originally thought. I guess really the development of these indirect rates really helps you quantify what you can afford to add into your rates and what you're assuming you're going to win, because wins tend to make rates go down, and bringing in G&A and overhead tends to make rates go up, and that's where the pressure is. So I think your key point about what you can afford and a tops down versus a bottom up kind of helps you get there and allows you to have that discussion with management. But as we all know, cash is king in this whole thing. You want revenue, gross margin, net income, and your indirect rates, but it's really all about cash, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And again, in this budgeting time, you're gonna see your kind of like high point, low points, like any months that are not going to be consistent month to month. Again, if you have new wins coming on, hiring more people, you might have with a new contract, you might start hiring people and be paying them for 2 months before you see dime one from the customer. Either the bill has to go through approval, or there might be differences in the billing process, might be issues setting up in wider workflow if you're DoD. And so you really have to plan ahead for any stumbles like that. Kind of the same thing on the other side. If you have work falling off, you might have required severance for people. You might try to keep people on a little longer during, let's say, a protest period. So this is a time of year to start doing some of that forecasting. We recommend kind of a rolling 3-month, looking at kind of your AP and AR each month. Look for those what you've hit in the previous year, those highs and lows, times where you had higher cash pressure, let's say. Maybe bills weren't getting approved or not getting out. High months of if you're T&M and you have take like a month like January where you have a couple of holidays right off the bat. Holidays when you're T&M, cut into your billable time. So you have to plan ahead. There's not going to be as much cash coming in the next month for in times where you're billing less T&M. So we let you kind of plan for those highs and lows, let's say ups and downs.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like if you're possibly expecting changes, either positive or negative, to what you're doing, say in 2024, and now you're going to figure out 2025. There might be instances, as you said, where suddenly you win a big contract, 20 people are going to come on, but they're not going to they're going to get paid immediately, but you're not going to get paid for 60 to 90 days because it's brand new, and we all know how quick the government is. So
yeah,
perhaps looking at some lines of credit, something like that, might be easier to do that now than, I don't know, say right before the contract hits.
Yeah, when
Start
you're under
talking to your
pressure.
banker if you have that relationship.
That's it. Yeah.
As they like to say, and this is a joke for all you bankers listening, that banks only want to lend you money when you don't need it. So perhaps it's time to establish that banking relationship or that line of credit relationship and fill that up so you're not scrambling at the last minute.
That's exactly right. And the lead time to get a line of credit, different banks are, different amounts of line of credit obviously are different for everyone. But you don't want to go in when you need it. You're too late at that point.
Yeah. And speaking of new business or business falling off, I guess it all comes down to, when you're building the budget is also looking at what your contract waterfall looks like. So, kind of walk us through the thoughts on a contract waterfall and what the points might be.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I've seen some small businesses do this, but mostly large businesses will have this, and I think it's a good practice no matter what your size. Contract waterfall basically is like looking at your not only your revenue but cost, what you have under contract now, what you have funded, and looking where you could see some fall off, and also where you're planning for new things to come on. Because you might have some holes in your budget, you might have some holes in the year. I think a lot of small companies just kind of run and be like, hey, this is where we are. We're doing, let's say, like 8 million a year, kind of on the smaller side, and we're going to do 8 million. We're going to do 12 million next year. We're going to grow 50%, and they don't really have a plan for it though. And so a contract waterfall, looking at what you have in hand and look at what you need, like based on your either proposals outstanding or proposals that maybe happen in Q1, is a great way to kind of measure where your true potential revenue for the year. I think a lot of times what I would see is people just would not plan for the fall off of a contract ending. Either the option year doesn't come through. This time of year, we also see a lot of working on continuing resolution. So like you might get the next option year, but your rates aren't changing yet. They delay when your new rates kick in. There's so many factors that even as a small business, you have the data in front of you. You can. Another mistake we see also with the contract waterfall is you're going to expect an award, let's say in February. And as anyone in this business knows, between protests, between delays and awards, you're expecting a call in February. you feel very good about it. It might not happen until maybe May, June timeframe. So you have to factor that into your plan. It's a good idea to kind of factor in a little time. What would you say, like a time?
Yeah, kind of a fudge factor,
Yeah,
just slippage. So you think it's going to happen February 1st, and maybe it gets awarded February 1st, but then there's a protest because there's a lot of protests that happen on these awards. And so, it might not be resolved for 3 months or 3 months after that. And so, are you really going to have 50 people working on February 1st, or is it going to be a phased approach, or should you just build in some months for slippage? We all want to be optimistic, but you have to be realistic because, hey, let's go back to that budget for a second. This is that reasonable wins discussion. When is it going to happen? How much is it going to be for it? How much revenue and direct cost? Because all of that also affects your rates, which we talked about earlier, which
exactly.
affects your pricing. And oh, by the way, it affects the cash flow that we just talked about. So it sounds like there's a lot of nuances that go into the contract waterfall and determining, when you actually not only going to get revenue, but the cash associated with that revenue, because cash and revenue aren't the same thing. There's usually a time between that. There's
Exactly.
probably other things that you need to talk to the client about, though, on these things as part of the waterfall, isn't there?
Well, I mean, this is just in general, like this is a good time. If you've kind of, again, if you're a small company and you've been running your company like crazy, you might have neglected some of those conversations with your client. And this might be a good time to get back in front of them and see what they have in their pipeline, what maybe potential new tasks that they have coming, um, any opportunities, where you can expand already won contracts, um, expand some T&M positions on an award that you already have. As a small business, you don't want to lose sight of kind of what brought you there. It's easier to keep keep work that you already have in hand than it is to win new work. So this is a good time to talk to your client, and don't let that get away. It might also be a good time to, you know, especially with continuing resolution, really understand what's happening with the agencies you're working with. Are they getting funding cuts? Um, I know in talking to one government official, like they're looking at reductions in their budget next year, so that's going to impact contractors for them. Um, you know, those are things that maybe you kind of want to stay ahead of.
And the other thing that you and I have both found in all the years that we've been doing this kind of work is you have
Yeah.
the program managers that are trying to run this whole thing. They got to worry about funding, they got to worry about people. I mean, what really you have to define the program manager's role of what they're doing,
Yeah.
and so a lot of it is having discussions on the contracts. Are we going to have funding? What kind of contract? What kind of margin? Program managers have always said, well, what can I do? And the thing that program managers can impact the most is gross margin because that's direct cost. Okay, they don't always get a say in everything that gets added to them, which is fringe overhead and G&A and anything else, but they can impact gross margin in both a positive and a negative way. And gross margin is what has to cover the rest of the company. And of course, always there's tracking funding. And if you're a program manager and you don't know where your funding is, reach out to your accountant. Your
Yeah.
accountant should be tracking that type of thing. And
Yeah.
speaking of tracking, there's probably some things you want to build in. As far as you put a budget together. Now, where are you?
Well, that's exactly right. So now we kind of talked about building a couple of tools, building a couple of budgeting tools, and you now's a good time to put together how you're going to track your actuals versus that, whether or not you're going to use it. We work with CostPoint and we work with Uninet mostly. Both those systems have budgeting modules. For better or worse, sometimes it would be just an Excel tracking module, and you're comparing your actuals to your budget every month or at least every quarter. Um, One more thing on the program manager role, it's probably a good idea to make sure that if you want your project manager to at least, work to gross profit, make sure that they have the tools in place. I mean, there's project management dashboards in Cost Point. I think Unit has something similar, and kind of, make sure a lot of times you want your project manager to manage the job, and it mostly means managing the customer and managing the people. But it might also be good to get them into how are they doing profitability wise? Are they, is the project running as efficiently as possible?
Yeah, that can be a key measurable for them. I mean,
Exactly.
obviously, people always think about key measurables at the top when they're talking about overall gross margin, overall revenue, and net income. Obviously, you want to be conscious of where you are in funding and cash, and then something I know you do all the time, Irwin, is you help people reforecast. Forecasting is a continual thing.
It's a continual
Once
thing, and then if you have like new work coming on, then you kind of have to rethink it. Sometimes you have to rethink everything. If you're bringing in a lot of, let's say, ODCs, bringing in some maybe value-added resale type work. Again, if you're adding a lot more people, yeah, your budget might change considerably.
which then gets back to like point
Everything
one
else.
that we started, which
Exactly.
is really it changes the budget, which changes the rates, which
Yep.
changes the bottom line, which changes all the percentages in your measurables. So looking at your forecast on a continual basis, obviously cash, you always want to forecast cash,
Yes.
but trying to figure out where your rates are going to go and figuring out, oh, we just won something or we didn't win something.
Right.
Not to be a downer there. Well, listen, this has been great. Obviously, Irwin and I, who've been friends for years, we could sit and talk about this stuff all day. And if you ever want to, feel free to call both of us, and we'll be happy to. But that's all the time we really have for today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Irwin or myself. This is Mike Cippel. We want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening. So please make sure to follow us on whatever you've got whenever you're looking at your podcasts. Follow us and the rest of the Cherry Bekaert podcasts that will be out there, particularly related to GovCon accounting. So we want to thank you and have a great day.